So, what's up? Welcome to this motorsport news channel. Today I'm going to talk about the latest Formula 1 news that have been revealed these previous days. So let's go! The first one is about Max Verstappen and his possible retirement from F1. Verstappen says Formula 1 staying with its current power unit balance would be mentally not doable for him. Max Verstappen says it is mentally not doable for him to remain in Formula 1 if the series can't drastically improve its power unit regulations for 2027, with proposals to move to a 60-40 split between combustion power and electric energy now in jeopardy. As F1 stakeholders try to find ways to improve the flawed 2026 power unit regulations for next year, a proposal has been tabled by the FIA to increase power from the V6 power plants and reduce the share of electric energy. But while the FIA said there was an agreement in principle on increasing the fuel flow to get to a 60-40 split for next year, in the days following that meeting, several manufacturers have since backtracked or voiced objections on the timelines involved, with some preferring to delay the changes to 2028 and make a smaller adjustment for next year. On Thursday, four-time world champion Verstappen, who has been the loudest critic of the current regulations, said the 60-40 change would be a very positive step in the right direction as he considers his future in F1. His Red Bull team, which builds its own engines with Ford, is also in favor of the change, as is Mercedes. But facing the prospect of the move being derailed by paddock politics, Verstappen now joined Williams driver Carlos Sainz in urging the FIA to step in and force the changes through, which it could theoretically do on safety grounds. Of course, I agree. And it will be better for the sport as a whole, Verstappen said when informed of Sainz's comments that the FIA has to take a tough stance on 2027. I can tell you if it stays like this, then, let's see. It's just mentally not doable for me to stay like this, absolutely not. Having been around for a decade, Verstappen wasn't surprised the proposed regulations change has turned political, although he hoped the 60-40 split can still happen. That's Formula 1 for you. It's simply like that. It's a bit of a shame, he said. Let's stay on the positive side. We're still looking towards making those changes. And of course, some people that at the moment maybe have a bit of an advantage will try to be difficult about it. But if the FIA is strong and also from the F1 management side, they just need to do it. Now let's go for the second one, which is about the Antonelli's frustration after George Russell's Canadian GP pole, according to Jamie Chadwick. Jamie Chadwick believes Kimi Antonelli will be frustrated after George Russell narrowly beat him to pole position at the Canadian Grand Prix. Three-time W Series champion and Sky Sports Formula 1 pundit Jamie Chadwick believes Kimi Antonelli will be left feeling frustrated after being narrowly beaten to pole position by his teammate George Russell during qualifying for the Canadian Grand Prix. As the clock ticked down to zero in qualifying at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, Antonelli looks set to take pole position for Sunday's race with a time of 1:12.646. But his experienced teammate, who had already won the sprint race earlier on Saturday, knocked him off the top spot at the last moment with a time of 1:12.578. I don't think George Russell was expecting pole position, Chadwick told Sky Sports F1 after the qualifying session. That whole session was horrible for him. He seemed to have an issue and Kimi Antonelli had a big advantage. It was only really the last lap when it came to him, so I am sure there is a sense of relief and elation. Anytime a sports person performs or bounces back under pressure, it has double the effect. It looked like anyone could be up for pole for the whole session. Isaac Hadjar was up there at one point, and then eventually it sorted itself out and we had the order it should be. She added, Kimi will be a bit frustrated. He was so strong throughout the session. I think he has had more consistent pace than George throughout this weekend, and that is going to be important for him in the race. George seemed to have put a lap in when he needed to, but Kimi looks like he had the lap in him easier in that session. While the Mercedes drivers will take up the front row on the Canadian Grand Prix starting grid, McLaren's Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri will start from third and fourth on the grid, with Ferrari's Lewis Hamilton rounding out the top five. And now I'm going to talk about other news like how Hamilton avoided Canadian GP grid penalty. Hamilton will line up fifth on the Canadian Grand Prix grid after avoiding a penalty for impeding. Seven-time world champion Lewis Hamilton has been cleared of allegedly impeding Pierre Gasly in Canadian Grand Prix qualifying, which means the Ferrari driver retains his fifth place on the starting grid. Hamilton made a trip to the FIA race stewards 1 hour after qualifying for allegedly blocking Alpine driver Gasly at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. On his first flying lap in Q1, Gasly encountered Hamilton, who was on an outlap, on the run down to turn 8. Hamilton appeared unaware of Gasly approaching as he weaved to warm up the tires. Explaining the incident to the stewards, Hamilton said that both he and his Ferrari team didn't think Gasly was on a flying lap. And because the incident didn't change Gasly's Q1 result, with the Frenchman advancing to Q2, they didn't feel aggrieved by Hamilton's actions. The driver of car 44 explained that he was under the impression that car 10 was not on a push lap, and his team confirmed that it had the same opinion. The driver and team representative of car 10 stated they did not consider this to be a case of unnecessary impeding. The stewards therefore determined to take no further action. Hamilton qualified fifth in Q3 behind the leading cars from Mercedes and McLaren, as he is set to share the third row with Red Bull's Max Verstappen. Gasly had struggled all weekend with the behavior of his car, taking his Alpine out of park firm after sprint, qualifying to use Saturday morning's 23-lap sprint as a glorified test run. But his fortunes didn't improve in qualifying as contact with a groundhog in Q1 caused lasting damage, which prevented him from qualifying higher than 14th in the next segment. Mercedes driver George Russell claimed pole with a last-ditch effort, beating teammate Kimi Antonelli's time to claim his second pole of the 2026 season. McLaren's Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri will line up on the second row on Sunday when wet conditions are a realistic possibility. And the last news, now I'm going to talk about Max Verstappen's statements after Montoya told that he should face a race suspension. Max Verstappen has hit back at Juan Pablo Montoya after the former F1 driver suggested he should face a race suspension. Max Verstappen has dismissed recent comments from former Formula One driver Juan Pablo Montoya after the Colombian suggested the four-time champion should face a race suspension for openly criticizing the championship's new regulations. The comments from Montoya stemmed from a somewhat frosty reception to the new 2026 regulation changes. In the early stages of the season, Verstappen described them as Formula E on steroids, while many others likened the racing to playing Mario Kart. During an appearance on the BBC Checkered Flag podcast following the Miami Grand Prix, Montoya said, "You've got to respect the sport. For me, what the drivers were doing, I'm okay you not liking the regulations, but the way you were speaking about what you're living off in your own sport, there should be consequences for that." When asked what he thought would be an appropriate consequence, Montoya added, "Park him. Yeah, add 7 points to the license, 8 points to the license. Whatever you do after, you're going to be parked." And I guarantee you all the message would be different. I'm not saying don't be outspoken, but don't come and call an F1 car a Mario Kart. Verstappen was asked about the comments in an interview with De Telegraph. I don't know what his problem is. I also don't care much for someone who talks so much nonsense. I just don't understand why types like that get paid by the management of Formula One, as he sometimes works for them, the Red Bull driver said. Surely you don't want someone like that in the paddock who spouts so much rubbish? I think it's a case of, I say something different from everyone else, so I'm relevant. It doesn't bother me that much. It's his problem. I live my life and won't let it influence me. And the last news, now I'm going to talk about how Mercedes plans to avoid what happened with Rosberg and Hamilton in 2016, and now with Antonelli and Russell. Wolff admitted last year that in hindsight, there was one aspect of 2016 he would have handled differently. However, 10 years later, the Mercedes boss has to apply a different lesson from the past. For once, the conversation in the Gilles Villeneuve paddock was not about batteries or energy management. Instead, the focus was firmly on the on-track action. During the Formula One sprint race for the Canadian Grand Prix, the battle between Kimi Antonelli and George Russell flared up for the first time. The young Italian attempted a move around the outside at turn 1, but was forced onto the grass when Russell closed the door. It left Antonelli frustrated as he argued that he had his mirror alongside Russell. However, when it comes to overtaking around the outside, the FIA's racing guidelines do not focus on mirror overlap, but on the position of the front axle. The FIA document explicitly states that overtaking on the outside will always be viewed as a more difficult maneuver to accomplish, precisely the view Russell shared post-race. As kids in karting, we know that there's a certain element of risk that comes with overtaking on the outside. They are amazing overtakes when they come off, but the chances are quite slim. More important than determining exactly who was right is how this affects the internal battle at Mercedes and how Toto Wolff chooses to handle it. Antonelli was frustrated behind the wheel to the extent that Wolff felt compelled to come on the team radio twice. The second intervention came after Antonelli's most interesting remark. "If we need to race like this, then good to know." The championship leader fumed. Speaking in the press conference afterwards, once tempers had cooled somewhat, Antonelli explained that in his view, what happened on track in Montreal was not entirely consistent with Mercedes' pre-race meetings. "Obviously, we do meetings before races, and that's what we say in the room. Then, of course, we race to win, and we try to do our best to defend our position. So probably I understood the significance of that meeting a bit differently." Asked by motorsport.com whether he would change his own approach if this kind of racing is deemed acceptable, Antonelli continued, "For sure. I think we probably just need a bit of clarity, and then once it's clear, then it's all going to be fine, I think. Definitely, I need to probably ask again. We all want the best for, first of all, each other, but also for the team. So for sure, we will clarify, and then everything's going to be fine." That final point is naturally the most interesting one. How the conversation after the sprint race will unfold, and whether Mercedes already feels the need to tighten its rules of engagement. Recent history offers two interesting examples. Last year, McLaren tried to manage the battle between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri through the much-discussed papaya rules. That term quickly took on a life of its own, and earlier this year, several McLaren team members admitted that the approach may at times have been overly restrictive, making life more difficult than necessary for both the team and both drivers. It is, however, a fine line to walk, over-regulating versus allowing tensions to rise too high and eventually reach boiling point on track. Wolff has plenty of experience with the latter from the Lewis Hamilton-Nico Rosberg title fight in 2016. Last year, during a remarkably candid media session at Zandvoort, the Mercedes boss shared some revealing reflections on that period. I mean, I was quite green at the time also. And I tried to, we always were open and transparent in terms of how we would handle the cars and everything. Wolff started. Where it got more difficult, I guess, was when Lewis had an engine failure in the lead in Malaysia, and that was very difficult for him to take. And from then on, the mistake that we've done is that we tried to finish the season with as little controversy as possible, rather than to say, we'll win the championship anyway, constructors and drivers, let it roll. And that is something I would maybe do differently today if we were ever to be in a luxurious position like this. Those are remarkably open comments, yet this situation is fundamentally different for two reasons, meaning Wolff cannot simply do what he suggested in Zandvoort. Most importantly, it is still early in the season and the competition is significantly closer than it was back then, particularly McLaren. Neither world championship is anywhere near secure now, meaning Mercedes cannot afford to give both drivers complete freedom. Another important difference is that Mercedes does not appear to be facing a repeat of the Rosberg scenario, where one of its drivers leaves F1 at the end of the season. Antonelli remains Mercedes' long-term prospect, while Russell has many more F1 seasons left in him as well. Of course, the Max Verstappen question continues to linger in the background, but Wolff has repeatedly stated that he sees the current lineup as a good option for Mercedes' future. If he genuinely believes that, then the relationship between his drivers must be maintained. In that respect, Wolff's comments from Zandvoort about 2016 are equally revealing. Even with Rosberg departing, that season still left scars, particularly in the relationship with Hamilton. It was a tough time with Lewis also. We had a really, really tough time around the prize giving when Nico announced it and also in the weeks after. And that's when I said, listen, we've got to sit down, because if we are not talking to each other, then where is this going? And I just want you to know that I'd like you to be in the team for a long time. You're the best driver. If you think we're the best team, then we need to just sit down and agree to disagree or put all those points out. And what we've really learned is that you need to communicate. That lesson applies again today, starting with the clarity Antonelli is asking for, and then ensuring that the relationship between the two drivers remains healthy, even with the eyes on the biggest prize. The competitive picture is different from 10 years ago, which means Mercedes must keep a firm grip on the situation, although the level of freedom it can afford its drivers might change later in the year. But for now, the team must keep control in a way that both drivers can accept, for which clarity is indeed key. It is not only important for the present, but even more for what may be at stake if the title fight intensifies later in the season. One emergency measure would be to threaten drivers with having to pay for the damage themselves, just as Mercedes did in 2016. For now, however, Wolff can laugh about that possibility and prefers constructive talks over financial punishments. Well, we haven't needed that option for a long time, but now I'll have to come up with something again. The Austrian laughed. And finally, we're going to talk about the Bearman's F1 new rules opinion. Recently introduced tweaks to the rules on electrical energy harvesting and deployment haven't made the process of getting a 2026 car around the lap any simpler. It's said that meetings are where minutes are kept, but hours are lost. One lesser documented but still painful consequence of the 2026 Formula One regulations has been the need to map out exactly how the limited quantity of electrical energy can be deployed and recharged to achieve the so-called optimal lap. And that naturally requires a meeting, albeit perhaps unusually a productive one. Since the energy store on an F1 car has a capacity of 4 megajoules, but the rules permit between 6 and 9 MJ to be deployed per lap depending on the circuit, the car is continuously either expending electrical energy or harvesting it. Ahead of each Grand Prix, the FIA publishes a document which not only lays out headline figures such as the deployment limit, but also drills into minutiae such as the low power zones, where harvesting is restricted to avoid large differences in closing speeds between cars. There is an optimal balance to be found in identifying areas where drivers can minimize speed lost by harvesting, and where the available electrical boost can be best deployed to improve lap times. This obviously differs from circuit to circuit depending on the ratio of straights to corners, the length of those straights, and the radius of the corners. It's a lot of numbers on a sheet, Oliver Bearman told media including motorsport.com. And actually, with distances of the lap as well, it's a bit confusing. Luckily, we have a good group upstairs who are translating that for us mortals and sort it out. But yeah, it's a lot more stuff to go over. And for example, now we have a dedicated half-hour, 45-minute PU meeting every weekend, which we would never even think of having last year because it was so straightforward. So it's definitely another thing to think about. But now we're on round 5, so we're getting there. We're getting up to speed step by step. So you don't need to start having lift and coast. You don't need to start using super clipping. You don't need to have the drivers holding part throttle on exit corners to avoid deploying in one place and putting it somewhere else. Yeah, it's something that, in a way, it's kind of introducing a problem to fix another problem. Maybe not ideal, but it's probably where we are with this current hardware across the whole grid. That's all for now. I hope you liked this video. If so, don't forget to give me a like and subscribe.